The weight of the cheap fabric of my dress felt heavier than usual that day, a scratchy, synthetic reminder of a life lived on the margins of someone else's dream. It was his graduation day, the culmination of a decade of my life, a decade poured into his ambition like water into a sieve. I remembered the day he told me he wanted to be a doctor. His eyes were wide with a fervor that was contagious, a burning desire to heal, to be someone of importance. We were young, barely out of our teens, with nothing to our names but a shared love in a tiny, drafty apartment that always smelled of damp concrete and instant noodles. I looked at him, at the raw hope in his face, and I made a promise, not just to him but to myself. I would be the bedrock upon which he would build his cathedral of success. I told him not to worry about money, not to worry about anything but his books. I would handle it, and I did. I dropped out of my community college courses, shelving my own modest dream of becoming a graphic designer. There was no time for my dreams when his was so vast and demanding. My hands, which had once dreamed of holding drawing pens and creating logos, learned the harsh language of industrial cleaning solvents and the repetitive strain of a cash register. My first job was at a diner, from 5 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. I learned to balance 4 plates on one arm and smile through the exhaustion that settled deep in my bones. The smell of grease and stale coffee became my permanent perfume. After the diner, I would rush to my second job, cleaning office buildings downtown. It was a lonely job, a silent waltz with a mop and bucket through deserted hallways under the cold, indifferent glow of fluorescent lights. I would see the remnants of other people's successful lives in their overflowing trash cans, half-eaten gourmet sandwiches, discarded drafts of important-looking documents, crumpled-up airline tickets to exotic places. It felt like I was a ghost haunting the periphery of a world I could never belong to. On weekends, when he was either buried in textbooks or at study groups, I took on my third job, stocking shelves at a 24-hour grocery store. The nights were the hardest, a blur of canned goods and expiration dates under the humming lights. Sleep became a luxury, something I snatched in fragmented 1-hour intervals on the lumpy sofa so as not to disturb him with my early morning alarms. Every dollar I earned, every single cent, was meticulously budgeted. A tiny portion for our rent and bills, a slightly larger one for his tuition and the mountain of expensive medical textbooks, and the rest for his needs. He needed good food to study, so I ate instant noodles and rice. He needed a quiet place to concentrate, so I learned to move through our tiny apartment like a phantom. He needed new clothes to look presentable for his rotations, so I wore my own clothes until they were threadbare, patching up holes with clumsy stitches late at night. My world shrank until it contained only one thing: his success. I became a machine fueled by caffeine and an unwavering belief in him. My friends from my old life slowly drifted away, tired of my constant refusals to go out, my perpetual exhaustion. My family worried, my mother's voice on the phone always tight with concern, asking if I was eating, if I was taking care of myself. I would lie, of course, telling her everything was fine, that we were a team, that this was our shared sacrifice for a shared future. I truly believed it. I saw my sacrifice not as a loss but as an investment in us. I would picture the future he painted for me in those rare moments he had a spare hour. A beautiful house with a big yard, travel, children who would never know the struggle we did. He would be a respected surgeon, and I would finally be able to rest. I would be the doctor's wife. The thought was a warm blanket on the coldest nights. He was grateful in the beginning. He would kiss my chapped hands and call me his angel, his savior. He would tell me how none of this would be possible without me, how he would spend the rest of his life making it up to me. I clung to those words. They were the fuel that kept me going when my body screamed for rest, but slowly, subtly, things began to change. As he progressed through medical school, he started spending more time with his classmates. They came from different worlds, worlds of privilege and legacy. Their parents were doctors and lawyers, they drove nice cars and wore clothes that weren't from a discount store. He started to look at me differently, or maybe I just started to notice it more. There was a flicker of something in his eyes when he'd introduce me to them. Was it shame? Embarrassment? I told myself I was imagining it. He was just stressed. The pressure was immense. He started to criticize me. My grammar wasn't correct. My clothes were outdated. My laugh was too loud. He said he was just trying to help me, to prepare me for the life we were going to have, for the circles we would move in. I tried to change. I started watching news channels instead of my silly sitcoms. I tried to read the books he suggested, but the words would just blur together, my mind too tired to absorb them. The more I tried, the more I seemed to fail in his eyes. He stopped calling me his angel. The day of his graduation felt surreal. I had taken the day off from all 3 of my jobs, a monumental feat of scheduling and begging managers. I spent a week's grocery money on the dress. It was a simple navy blue sheath, the nicest thing I had owned in a decade. I did my hair, put on a little makeup, trying to look the part of a proud, supportive partner. I wanted to look like I belonged there next to him. When I saw him in his cap and gown, a wave of emotion so powerful it almost knocked me over washed through me. All the years of backbreaking work, the sleepless nights, the gnawing hunger, the loneliness, it all felt worth it in that single moment. He had done it, we had done it. I rushed to him, my eyes filled with tears, ready to throw my arms around him. But he put up a hand, stopping me. His smile was tight, strained. He was standing with a group of his friends and their well-dressed families. "Let's not make a scene," he murmured, his voice low. The words were a physical blow, a scene. I was his partner of 10 years. I had funded this very moment. I looked at the faces of his friends' parents, their gazes sliding over me with a mixture of pity and disdain. I saw the girl standing next to him, a classmate of his I'd heard him mention. She was beautiful, poised, wearing a dress that probably cost more than our rent for 3 months. She looked at me like I was a piece of dirt on her shoe. He barely acknowledged me throughout the ceremony. I sat alone in the vast auditorium, a tiny, insignificant speck in a sea of proud families. I watched him walk across the stage, accept his diploma, and shake the dean's hand. I clapped until my hands were raw, my cheers swallowed by the crowd. I kept telling myself it was the pressure of the day. He was overwhelmed. Later, at the reception, he would be different. He would hold my hand, introduce me properly, and tell everyone how he couldn't have done it without me. That's what I told myself. That's the hope I clung to. After the ceremony, I found him near the champagne fountain, laughing with the same group. I walked towards him, my cheap heels sinking slightly into the manicured lawn. "Honey," I started, a hopeful smile on my face. He turned, and the smile on his face vanished, replaced by a look of sheer annoyance. He took a step away from his friends, pulling me roughly to the side, behind a large potted plant as if to hide me. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "I was just coming to congratulate you," I whispered, my voice trembling. "We did it." He let out a short, harsh laugh. "We know, I did it. I got myself through medical school." My heart stopped. I could feel the blood draining from my face. "What are you talking about? My job's the money," he waved a dismissive hand. Yes, you provided a service. I'm grateful, of course, but you need to understand, things are different now. My life is going in a new direction." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit, the one I had painstakingly saved for months to buy him, and pulled out a thick envelope. He thrust it into my hands. "What is this?" I asked, my fingers fumbling with the seal. "Those are divorce papers," he said, his voice cold and flat, devoid of any emotion. "And a check. It should be enough to cover your first and last month's rent on a new place. I've been generous." A roaring sound filled my ears, the world tilted on its axis. Divorce, a check. It couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of cruel, elaborate joke. "A new place, what about our apartment, our life?" "It's my apartment now," he stated simply. "And my life, a life you're not part of." He glanced over his shoulder at the pretty classmate who was watching us with a smug little smile. "I'm with her now. Her father is the chief of surgery at the hospital where I'll be doing my residency. Do you understand? This is a different league. You just wouldn't fit in." The word hung in the air between us, ugly and sharp. Embarrassment. He had called me an embarrassment once, during an argument after I'd shown up at one of his university functions in my diner uniform because I didn't have time to go home and change. I had cried for hours that night, and he had apologized, saying he was just stressed, but he had meant it. He had always meant it. I looked down at my hands, the knuckles red and swollen, the nails short and broken from years of manual labor. I thought of the burns on my arms from the deep fryers, the permanent ache in my lower back. I had sacrificed my body, my youth, my own potential for him. I had been his ladder, and now that he had reached the top, he was kicking it away. A cold, quiet rage began to bloom in my chest, a feeling so foreign and yet so powerful it made me feel dizzy. He saw the shift in my expression, and his face hardened. "Don't try to make a scene here," he warned. "It's over, just accept it with some dignity. It's the least you can do." He turned to walk away, to rejoin his new life, leaving me behind the potted plant with the ruins of my own. He really thought it was that simple. He really thought he could just discard me like one of those crumpled-up pieces of paper in the trash cans I used to empty. He thought that because I didn't have a fancy degree, because I worked with my hands, that I was stupid. He had no idea what my uneducated mind was capable of. He had no idea what I had been doing in those long, lonely hours when he thought I was just a tired, simple woman waiting for her husband to come home. He had no idea about the other life I had been building, the one he knew nothing about, the one that was about to bring his carefully constructed new world crashing down around him. He thought he was closing a chapter, but he had just started a war he was completely unprepared to fight. The coldness of the envelope in my hand seeped into my skin, a chilling premonition of the life he had planned for me. A check and a legal document, a transaction to neatly sever a decade of my existence from his. He walked away from me without a backward glance, melting back into the crowd of smiling, successful people, leaving me hidden and disgraced behind the decorative foliage. For a moment I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the spot, and the sounds of the celebration around me faded into a dull, meaningless buzz. The taste of betrayal was coppery and sharp in my mouth. He had used me. It was that simple, that brutal. I wasn't his partner. I was his long-term, all-inclusive scholarship fund, a means to an end. The naive girl who believed in love and sacrifice was dead, and in her place something else was taking root, something hard and unyielding. I didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come. Instead, a strange clarity washed over me. The fog of exhaustion and blind devotion I had lived in for 10 years was finally lifting, and I could see everything with a painful, sharp focus. I saw his years of subtle manipulations, the way he isolated me from my friends and family, the way he chipped away at my self-esteem until I felt I was nothing without him. He needed me to feel small so I would never question my role in his grand plan. He needed me to believe that my only value was in my ability to serve him, and I had let him. I had willingly participated in my own erasure, but the thing about being invisible for so long is that you learn to observe. While I was scrubbing floors and stocking shelves, a silent ghost in other people's lives, my mind was always working. Loneliness is a great incubator for thought. In those long, silent nights at the cleaning job, I started to listen to the financial news on the radio I brought with me. At the grocery store, I read the business sections of the newspapers and magazines I was stocking. It started as a way to pass the time, to feel connected to a world outside of my grim reality. But then a spark of interest became a flame of fascination. I started to see patterns. I learned about stocks, about investments, about how money really works. It was a language just like the medical jargon he was learning, and I discovered I had a knack for it. I was good with numbers, with logic, with seeing the bigger picture. My mind, which he had dismissed as simple and uneducated, was sharp and hungry. 2 years into his medical school journey, when his complaints about money were at their peak and my body was starting to break down from the strain of 3 jobs, I made a decision. It was a secret I kept locked away, a part of my life that was entirely my own. I had opened a separate bank account. It started small. Every week I would skim a tiny amount of cash from my tips at the diner, just $5 or $10. It was a pittance, but it was mine. I would deposit it into the account he knew nothing about. It was my safety net, my just-in-case fund. At first, just in case meant in case the car broke down or we had an unexpected medical bill. But as his attitude towards me grew colder and more dismissive, the meaning of just in case began to shift. It became just in case he leaves me. With my secret savings, I made my first investment. It was a small, calculated risk in a tech startup I had read about, a company everyone else was overlooking. I used a simple online brokerage account that I managed from the old, discarded library computers during my 30-minute break between my diner and cleaning jobs. I pored over market analyses and company reports with the same intensity he applied to his medical textbooks. While he was memorizing the bones of the human body, I was memorizing financial charts and investment strategies. My tiny investment grew. I sold it and reinvested the profits. Then I did it again and again. I was cautious, methodical, and patient. I treated it like a strategy game. I diversified. I learned about real estate from a talkative janitor at one of the office buildings who owned several rental properties. He thought I was just a curious cleaning lady making polite conversation. He had no idea I was absorbing his every word, learning about property management, zoning laws, and identifying undervalued areas of the city. Using the profits from my stock trading, I made a down payment on a small, run-down single-family home in a neighborhood that was years away from gentrification. I did it all through a shell corporation I created, a simple LLC. It was surprisingly easy to set up online. The paperwork was my secret study material. I became the owner of a property he didn't even know existed. I used my cleaning skills to fix up the place myself on my rare days off, patching drywall, painting walls, and refinishing floors. I rented it out to a young family, and that rental income became another stream of revenue which I then funneled back into more investments. Over the next 8 years, while he was becoming Dr. Perfect, I was quietly becoming a savvy investor. I built a small but robust portfolio of stocks and a handful of rental properties. I lived like a pauper, but I was secretly building an empire, one $5 tip and one smart investment at a time. I never touched a penny of it for myself. I still wore the threadbare clothes, ate the instant noodles, and worked the grueling hours. My sacrifice had to be believable. My exhaustion had to be real. He could never suspect that I had a world of my own, a source of power that was independent of him. So as I stood there behind that plant with his divorce papers in my hand, the initial shock gave way to a cold, calculating calm. He thought he was leaving me with nothing. He had emptied our joint account, I was sure of it. He had left me a check that he considered a generous pittance to get rid of me. He thought he was the winner, the one with the brilliant future. The uneducated mind he had so casually dismissed had outmaneuvered him in ways he couldn't even begin to fathom. I tore open the envelope. The divorce papers were standard, no fault. He clearly expected me to sign them without a fight. He wanted a clean break. The check was for $5,000. $5,000 for 10 years of my life. The insult was so profound it was almost comical. I folded the check carefully and tucked it into my purse. Then I tore the divorce papers into 4 neat pieces and let them fall to the grass like confetti. My first move was to walk away. Not in tears, not with a dramatic outburst, but with my head held high. I walked out of that reception, past the curious stares of his new, important friends, and didn't look back. I got into my old, rusty car, the one he was always so embarrassed by, and drove not to our apartment, but to a nice hotel downtown. I used a credit card he didn't know I had, one linked to my business account. I booked the best suite they had. That night, I ordered room service for the first time in my life. I had a steak, a glass of expensive red wine, and a decadent chocolate cake. I took the longest, hottest bath of my life in the marble tub, letting the steam and the silence wash away the last 10 years of grime. The next morning, I didn't go to the diner or the office building or the grocery store. I called each of my managers and quit. The sense of freedom was intoxicating. Then I went shopping. I threw away the cheap, scratchy dress from the graduation and bought a whole new wardrobe. Beautifully tailored suits, elegant dresses, shoes with sharp, confident heels. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in a decade, I saw a glimpse of the woman I was supposed to be, not the worn-out shell I had become. My real work was about to begin. He wanted our apartment, the one my sweat and tears had paid for all these years. He thought it was his. A quick search of the city's property records online confirmed what I already knew. When we first moved in, he couldn't get approved for the lease because he had no income, so the lease had always been in my name and my name alone. I had renewed it year after year. Legally, he was just a long-term guest, a guest whose welcome had just expired. I hired a locksmith and a moving company. While he was likely celebrating his newfound freedom with his new girlfriend, my movers were efficiently and legally removing all of his belongings from my apartment. His designer clothes, his expensive new electronics, his cherished medical books, everything was carefully packed and put into a storage unit. I paid for the first month. After that, it was his problem. Then I had the locks changed. When he finally came home from his celebratory weekend, his key wouldn't work. His initial confusion would turn to annoyance, then to anger. He would bang on the door, but no one would answer. He would call my phone, but I wouldn't pick up. I had already changed my number. He would find a neatly taped envelope on the door. Inside, there wouldn't be a tear-stained letter. There would be a formal notice of eviction, giving him 30 days to remove his property from the storage unit before its contents were auctioned off. And there would be a business card. Not for a divorce lawyer, not yet. It was the card for the property management company that now handled my small real estate empire. My company, this was just the beginning. He had underestimated me. He thought he was fighting a tired, heartbroken woman with no resources. He had no idea he was fighting a calculated, financially independent woman with a deep understanding of the law and a burning desire for justice. He had taken 10 years of my life. I was about to take everything he thought he had earned. The silence in my apartment was a revelation. For a decade, the space had been filled with the sounds of his existence, the rustle of his books, the low murmur of his late-night study sessions, the sheer volume of his presence. Now there was only a profound and peaceful quiet. I had spent the first 2 days after changing the locks systematically erasing him from the physical space. I packed away the few sentimental items I had kept, photos of a younger, happier couple that now looked like strangers. I threw out his old clothes, the worn-out sweatshirts he used to study in, items that once brought me comfort but now felt like artifacts of a betrayal. I deep-cleaned every corner, scrubbing away not just dirt but memories. I was reclaiming my territory. I knew he would not go quietly. His entire life was built on an edifice of arrogance and entitlement. Being locked out of what he considered his home would be an affront to his very being. The predictable explosion came on the third day. It wasn't a call to my new number, which he didn't have, but a series of frantic, escalating emails to my old address, which I had kept active for this very purpose. The first email was confused. "Key isn't working. Are you home? Call me." The second was annoyed. "This isn't funny. I need to get my things. I have residency orientation tomorrow." The third was furious. "I swear if you've done something stupid you will regret it. I will call the police. This is my apartment." I read each email with a calm, detached interest like a scientist observing a specimen. The panic and rage in his words were a stark contrast to the tranquility of my new life. I didn't respond. I knew that silence would infuriate him more than any angry retort. His next step was to show up at my old jobs, a move I had fully anticipated. My former manager at the diner called me, her voice a mix of bewildered and wary. He had come in during the morning rush, demanding to know where I was, causing a scene. He had tried to spin a story about me being emotionally unstable, of running off after a small disagreement. But my former coworkers, the people who had seen me day in and day out for years, exhausted but always reliable, didn't buy it. They saw a frantic, entitled man trying to bully people for information. They told him they didn't know anything and asked him to leave. He got the same reception at the office building and the grocery store. I had been a quiet background figure in these places, but I had also been kind and dependable. I had covered shifts, listened to their stories, and done my work without complaint. They felt a quiet loyalty to me, not to the arrogant man who used to occasionally pick me up in my rusty car with a look of disdain on his face. He had alienated the very people he now needed. His world was shrinking. Defeated on that front, he did what he had threatened to do. He called the police. An officer called me as the primary leaseholder to inquire about a domestic dispute. I calmly explained the situation. I told him that the man was my ex-partner, that the lease was solely in my name, and that he no longer lived at the residence. I informed him that his belongings had been professionally moved and secured in a storage unit, and that he had been formally notified of how to retrieve them. I was polite, articulate, and factual. There was nothing illegal about what I had done. It was my apartment. I had every right to change the locks and deny entry to someone who was not on the lease. The officer, satisfied that this was a civil matter and not a criminal one, informed him there was nothing they could do. I could almost hear the sputtering indignation on the other end of the line. This was a blow to his ego he could not comprehend. The world was supposed to bend to his will. He was the doctor, the success story. I was the uneducated cleaning lady. How could I be outmaneuvering him? His next communication was from a lawyer. A formal threatening letter arrived, accusing me of illegal eviction and theft of property, demanding immediate access to the apartment and financial compensation for his emotional distress. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I didn't hire just any lawyer. During my years of quiet research, I had identified the best divorce attorney in the city. She was a shark, known for her meticulous preparation and her merciless cross-examinations. She specialized in representing women who had been financially exploited by powerful husbands. I walked into her office wearing one of my new power suits, my hair styled, my demeanor calm and professional. I laid out the entire story, but I didn't tell it as a tale of woe. I presented it as a business case. I had a decade's worth of financial records, bank statements showing my 3 separate paychecks being deposited into our joint account. Receipts for his tuition, his books, his living expenses, all paid from that account. I had spreadsheets I had meticulously maintained, tracking every dollar I had earned and every dollar that had been spent on his education. I had calculated the total sum of my financial contribution to his career, and then I had calculated the interest it would have accrued had it been invested in a simple index fund over the past 10 years. The number was staggering. Then I showed her the records for my other life, the brokerage accounts, the real estate holdings under my LLC, the proof of my own financial success built in secret while he believed I was barely scraping by. The lawyer looked at me over the top of her glasses, a slow smile spreading across her face. "He has no idea, does he?" she asked. "None," I replied. "He thinks I'm destitute. He served me divorce papers with a $5,000 check." She let out a low whistle. "He's in for a rude awakening, so what do you want?" "I don't want spousal support," I said, the words feeling powerful and clean. "I don't need his money. I want reimbursement. I want to be paid back for my investment in his education with interest. It was a business deal and he broke the contract. I want him to acknowledge legally and financially that his success was built on my labor." My lawyer went to work. Our response to his lawyer's letter was not a defense but an attack. We filed a countersuit. We weren't just agreeing to the divorce, we were demanding it on our terms. We laid out in excruciating detail the full extent of my financial contributions. We weren't claiming it as marital property to be divided. We framed it as a business investment that required repayment. We attached every bank statement, every receipt, every spreadsheet. We were suing him for the cost of his entire medical education and living expenses for the past 10 years, plus damages and interest. The legal term for it was unjust enrichment. He had been unjustly enriched at my direct and substantial expense. When his lawyer received our filing, I imagine there was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a frantic phone call. The man he thought he was representing, a successful new doctor being harassed by a scorned ex-girlfriend, was actually a financial dependent who had just discarded his primary investor. His girlfriend's father, the powerful chief of surgery, was brought into the loop. The narrative he had spun to them of a controlling, simple-minded ex he had finally gotten the courage to leave fell apart in the face of our mountain of evidence. Suddenly, his brilliant future didn't look so secure. An association with a nasty, protracted legal battle where he was painted as a user and an exploiter was not a good look for an aspiring surgeon. The pressure on him must have been immense. His lawyer requested a meeting. We agreed, but not in an office. My lawyer booked a conference room at a neutral location. I walked in and saw him for the first time since his graduation day. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a sullen, resentful glare. He was sitting next to his lawyer. His girlfriend, the surgeon's daughter, was there too, a decision I found both foolish and telling. She was there to stake her claim, to show me I had lost. She had no idea what kind of game she had just walked into. My lawyer began, laying out our case with cold, brutal efficiency. She presented the numbers, the evidence of my 3 jobs, the clear financial trail. As she spoke, I watched him. He refused to look at me, staring at the polished surface of the conference table. But the girl, his new life, she couldn't stop looking at me. Her initial smugness was fading, replaced by a look of dawning horror. She was looking at my tailored suit, my confident posture, and listening to the damning evidence, and the image of the poor, pathetic ex-girlfriend he had described was crumbling before her eyes. She was realizing that the man she had attached herself to was not the self-made genius he pretended to be. He was a fraud built and paid for by the woman sitting across the table. The final blow came when my lawyer addressed his claim for emotional distress. And regarding Mr. His name's claim for distress, she said, her voice dripping with ice, we find it curious. Particularly since it seems my client was the one who was summarily dismissed from a 10-year partnership on the day of what should have been a joint celebration, a partnership she funded in its entirety. Furthermore, any personal property he feels is being withheld is available to him upon the prepayment of the outstanding storage fees for which he has been invoiced. Then she slid a new folder across the table. However, she continued, my client is a reasonable woman. She is willing to forego the protracted and, I assure you, publicly embarrassing lawsuit for unjust enrichment. In exchange for a clean divorce, she will accept a simple repayment of the principal investment she made. No interest, no damages. His lawyer opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a single number on it, the total amount I had spent on him over 10 years. His face went pale. The girl next to him gasped. It was a fortune. It was more money than he could imagine making in his first decade as a doctor. This is insane, he finally sputtered, finding his voice. There's no way I can pay that. You'll find a way, my lawyer said smoothly. You could take out a loan, consider it a student loan with a single debtor, or we can proceed with the lawsuit and have the courts garnish your future wages, a significant portion of them, for a very, very long time. I wonder how the board at the hospital would feel about their new resident having his wages garnished to repay the cleaning lady who funded his education. It's not a very good look, is it? He looked at his girlfriend, his eyes pleading, but she wasn't looking at him with sympathy. She was looking at him with contempt. She stood up abruptly. I think I've heard enough, she said, her voice shaking with rage. She looked at me, then back at him. You're a liar. She turned and walked out of the room, her heels clicking an angry rhythm on the floor. In that moment, he lost everything. He had traded me in for a future that had just walked out the door. He was left with nothing but a mountain of debt and the consequences of his own cruelty. He was trapped, and I was finally free. The silence that followed her exit was thick and heavy. He sat slumped in his chair, the color completely drained from his face. All the fight, the blustering anger, the entitled rage, it had all evaporated, leaving behind a hollowed-out man. He was staring at the number on the paper as if it were a death sentence. His lawyer, a practical man who clearly knew he was defending a losing case, sighed and gently pushed the document back towards the center of the table. We're going to need some time to discuss this, he said, his professional tone barely masking his own defeat. My lawyer simply nodded. Take all the time you need. The offer is on the table for 48 hours. After that, we proceed with the full lawsuit, and I will be petitioning to have his medical license suspended pending the outcome on grounds of moral turpitude. The threat was audacious, a masterstroke of legal aggression. Whether it would actually work was debatable, but the mere possibility was enough to send a fresh wave of panic across his face. A scandal of that magnitude would destroy his career before it even began. He had built his entire identity around becoming a doctor, and now that very identity was being threatened by the woman he had deemed an embarrassment. We stood up to leave. As I walked towards the door, he finally spoke, his voice hoarse and barely a whisper. Why? I stopped and turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time in that room. I didn't see the man I had once loved or the monster who had betrayed me. I just saw a weak, pathetic boy who had been so terrified of his own inadequacy that he had to belittle me to feel powerful. You asked me to make a sacrifice, I said, my voice even and calm. You told me it was an investment in our future. You were right, it was an investment, and now the investor is cashing out. I didn't wait for a reply. I walked out of that conference room and didn't look back. The 48 hours passed in a blur of quiet activity. I finalized the sale of one of my smaller rental properties to a young couple, finding a deep satisfaction in helping them start their own dream. I started sketching out ideas for a logo for a new business I was considering, my old passion for graphic design reemerging from the ashes of my past life. I was building, creating, moving forward. He was stuck, drowning in the consequences of his actions. On the final hour of the deadline, his lawyer called mine and accepted the terms. The settlement was drawn up quickly. It was ironclad. He would be required to sign over a significant percentage of his pre-tax income to me every month until the full debt was repaid. It would take him years, possibly more than the decade I had spent supporting him. He was legally tethered to the woman he had tried to discard. The divorce was finalized by a judge in a quiet courtroom. He wasn't there, only his lawyer was. I stood there feeling not triumphant, not joyful, but profoundly, deeply calm. It was over. The last tie was cut. I was no longer the doctor's wife or the doctor's ex-wife. I was just me, and for the first time in a very long time that felt like more than enough. The first payment arrived in my bank account a month later. It was a substantial amount of money, but looking at the transaction, I felt nothing. The money was never the point, it was the principle. It was the acknowledgement of my worth, a price tag put on my sacrifice that he could never again deny. I took that first payment and I did something I had dreamed of for years. I started a scholarship fund at the community college I had been forced to drop out of. It was specifically for women who had to interrupt their education to support a family or a partner. I called it the Second Chance Scholarship. My own story, my own name remained anonymous. It wasn't about recognition for me. It was about ensuring that another woman, full of dreams and potential, would not have her future derailed by someone else's ambition. My real estate business flourished. I discovered I had a real talent for seeing the potential in neglected properties and rundown neighborhoods. I wasn't a ruthless developer. I focused on creating affordable, quality housing. I hired my own crews, paid them well, and took pride in the communities I was helping to build. My life became full, not with the reflected glory of a successful husband, but with my own achievements. I traveled not to the fancy resorts he had promised, but to places I had always wanted to see on my own terms. I learned to be comfortable with my own company, to enjoy the peace of my own thoughts. I never heard from him directly again, but I heard stories. His residency was a nightmare. The story of his disastrous divorce and the massive debt he owed to his ex-wife became a whispered legend in the hospital corridors. His ex-girlfriend's father, the chief of surgery, made sure his path was anything but smooth. He was passed over for promotions, given the worst shifts, and treated like a pariah. The brilliant career he had sacrificed me for never truly materialized. He was just another doctor, burdened by debt and a reputation he could never escape. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, forced to write a check every month that was a constant reminder of his failure, not as a doctor, but as a human being. One day, a few years later, I was visiting one of my properties, talking to the young family who lived there. Their little girl ran up to me and handed me a crayon drawing of a house with a smiling sun above it. In that simple, pure moment of connection, I felt a wave of gratitude so intense it took my breath away. He had thought my world was small. He had thought my mind was uneducated. But my world was now as big as I wanted it to be, built not on a fancy degree, but on resilience, intelligence, and a quiet strength he never bothered to see. He had tried to bury me, but he didn't know I was a seed, and from the dirt he had thrown on me, I had grown into something he could never comprehend. My revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, systemic, and complete. It was the success of my business, the peace in my heart, and the knowledge that I had taken the worst betrayal of my life and transformed it into a legacy of hope for other women. I had built my own cathedral, not on the bedrock of someone else's dream, but on the solid foundation of my own strength. And it was beautiful. Thanks for listening this story. Now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Share this story with your friends and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Revenge Laura for more episodes.